Okay, welcome Sens fans. I hope you're doing well. Welcome to the 19th NHL Draft recap, and today we're looking at the team that went into the draft with the most absurd amount of draft capital you can imagine, the Ottawa Senators. Now, leading the way, the Ottawa Senators surprised nobody by drafting Tim Stützle third overall. Now, I know there are people out there that think Tim Stützle could be a center. Maybe. I don't really see it, and I know I'm not the only one who sees that, but that's only because I think he could be such an excellent scoring winger for the Ottawa Senators. He's an electrifying offensive talent with tons and tons of skill. He does seem to process the game extremely quickly to the point of it being a fault, where he's trying thing after thing after thing on the ice until something works. Whereas I think being a little bit more careful and tactical about his decision making and what he's trying to get done on the ice could lead to him being a more successful overall impact player. But he's a reliable transition player offensively, not unreliable defensively, and his offensive skill is absolutely undeniable. Would he have been my pick at third overall? Probably not. I would have looked at a Lucas Raymond or a Marco Rossi in this slot, but you could make the argument that Stützle should go at number 3. So I'm glad that the Ottawa Senators snagged him, and I'll be really curious to see what they can do with him over the next few years while he develops as a Senator. Then at 5th overall, they took Jake Sanderson, and I know this didn't surprise a whole lot of people, and it didn't really surprise me either, but I feel like a top 5 pick in any NHL draft, especially when you're a rebuilding team with your second top 5 pick, I get the feeling that you need to swing as much as you possibly can on overall impact on the game, especially in an offensive sense. I think Jake Sanderson will be a fine NHL player. He's a great transition defenseman both offensively and defensively. And I think through being such a high-level player in that area, he is going to enable the rest of the players around him to produce offensively more. I think he's going to be a valuable piece for the Ottawa Senators moving forward. But I look at what the Ottawa Senators could have ended up with in this year's top 5. If they had gone with a Marco Rossi or a Lucas Raymond at 3 and let the Detroit Red Wings take one of Raymond or Rossi and you take whoever one of those two players slip to number 5, I think you end up with a much better looking future up front for the Ottawa Senators than what they ended up with. Jake Sanderson is going to be a serviceable player, but you look at the defense group on that team moving forward, they already have some pretty solid defensive names on the way and already on the roster. But it is an acceptable pick at 5, and I can't really fault them. I think Jake Sanderson is a very good defenseman, with good 5-on-5 upside as a second pair guy. Again, the question is just what did you leave on the table? I guess time will tell, but I was more a fan of other players in this slot in a year where I felt the defense crop was a little bit weak relative to prior years. At 28th overall, I really thought that names like Maverick Bourque or Brendan Brisson would go off the board here to the Ottawa Senators, but Ridley Gregg was a player that was rumored to be a first-round pick, and I do see the argument as to why that might be the case, but again, the Ottawa Senators are a team that I think could use more offensive firepower in their pipeline, especially down the middle, and they drafted a player who mostly played the wing in a grinder's role, with some good offensive output granted, but I look at Ridley Gregg as maybe a third-line energy guy, and I just really don't know where his game is going to go from here. He has some good skill, he's a good skater, he can push to the net really aggressively pretty well, but I just didn't think it was enough to warrant a pick in the first round. I'm more than happy to be wrong, and I'm certain that he's going to be an NHL player at some point, but this kind of gives me those Trent Frederick vibes from the Boston Bruins a few years ago where they're purposefully aiming low in order to add a bottom 6 player down the road. I don't mind Ridley Gregg, but again, you have to think about what they left on the board at these picks. And I thought there was serious firepower they could have added literally going immediately after Ridley Gregg went off the board. Speaking of offensive firepower though, they took Robby Yarovanti at 33, and to some this might have been a bit of a reach, but I like Robby Yarovanti. He's got some really good skill to move up the ice and open up the ice so he can navigate around a little bit easier. When he moves his feet and applies his strength and his size really well, he can really get moving up the ice. And his shot is exceptional. He knows how to put it in the net, and he's already scoring at a really solid rate in the Finnish Liga to start the year this year. I like Robby Yarovanti, and his potential is only as high as he wants it to be. I think he could be a great pickup at 33 for the Senators, especially if the idea is to make him just a straight-up scoring winger. I think he could get there, and I was a fan of that pick at 33. Then at 44, the Ottawa Senators made a move that I think could really come to define a storyline coming out of this draft. They traded the 59th and 64th overall picks to the Toronto Maple Leafs to move up to 44 to draft Tyler Kleven. Now, I would be fascinated to see Tyler Kleven playing in the Finnish Liga in the same role that Topi Niemela played in, because frankly, I don't see how a player like Tyler Kleven would have done any better than a player like Topi Niemelä did. I'm not a huge fan of Tyler Kleven. He skates okay, he knows how to hit guys, he chases physical intensity a lot, which I'm sure a lot of people really like, but his play with the puck and his play away from the puck in terms of anticipating play and properly defending, I just didn't see enough, especially for 44th overall, and doubly so to trade up 2 solid picks that turned out to be 2 potential NHL players. I don't really know how any other argument outside of big strong defenseman hits big is what makes sense for the Ottawa Senators to make a move like this. And I really think that the 2 players that Toronto drafted after Tyler Kleven will not only be NHL contributors, but might be NHL contributors quicker than Tyler Kleven is. So we'll see what happens, but this was a really risky move that I wouldn't have done. But I guess the NHL seems to really want to make their rosters tougher to play against, whatever that means. At 61, the Ottawa Senators drafted Jagor Sokolov, and this was a guy who's been undrafted for a couple of years despite posting good results, and the big thing with him is his skating. The Ottawa Senators are clearly not afraid of drafting players previously undrafted, 20-year-old big players that can score, which they've done multiple times in the last 2 years. But I look at Sokolov and see a guy who has good skill and a great shot, pretty solid offensive instincts, but still the shortcomings and all the things that you need to get the puck in a position where he can score. I found that Ryan Francis was a guy driving the bus on that line quite a lot more, and you get 2 more years for Ryan Francis to develop in junior. I think Sokolov is a perfectly fine player. I think he's able to score. I'll be curious to see how he does in the AHL if that's where he is next season. But again, at 61, for a team that is rebuilding with a need for long-term planning and projection before they really become contenders, I thought there were bigger swings they could have taken at 61 instead of bunting on a 20-year-old QMJHL scoring forward that is a giant that still has some mobility concerns. We'll see what happens, but this was another one that was a little bit too rich for me. Shortly after its 71st overall, the Ottawa Senators took a goaltender in Leevi Merilainen. Now, I've never seen him play. I went back and watched some tape recently since the draft. He's a guy, he's a goalie, he backed up Joel Blomqvist, he had really good numbers at the under-18 level, but I can't say I've seen enough to make it worth a 3rd-round pick. I know some people out there who watch a lot more European hockey than I do really were confused as to why he was drafted so high, but he's not small, he stops pucks. Maybe he turns into something. We'll have to wait and see. The Senators then took a little break, and then at 155th, they took Erik Engstrand, another giant 20-year-old winger that plays in Sweden. I'm not a huge fan of drafting Swedish Junior League players that are 20 years old, but it's not unprecedented. I actually kind of liked what Erik Engstrand was doing last year. I think there's solid skill, really good puck protection ability, and a decent amount of skating talent, and a good nose for the back of the net with some creativity as well. Fights hard in front of the net, he's a good power player, but again, this is a guy who went to the SHL this year for 9 games and had no production to show for it. I'm just not sure if there was enough of a needle mover at 155 for a 20-year-old player to really warrant an NHL draft pick, and I think some players that were 2 years younger than him that were available at this slot would have been better picks for the Senators. I guess he's further along in his development, and he certainly is very big, and he certainly plays in front of the net with a lot of strength, but I'm just not really sure how many of those players can be real impact NHL players considering how many of them the Ottawa Senators have picked recently. I'm not really expecting a whole lot out of this pick, and again, this might be another one where they're bunting for reasons that I don't entirely understand, outside of just wanting to draft big, strong, powerful players. The Senators then drafted at 158th and took Phillippe Daou, and I've seen a little bit of Daou since the draft because this is another one where I just didn't know who he was, and I really didn't come away thinking that he was enough of a needle mover to warrant an NHL pick. Again, this is not a situation where I'm trying to just say that he's a bad player, but I would really like to understand what it exactly was that the Ottawa Senators saw in him that they think they can develop into an NHL player. I think he's a fine junior player for a really good program in Moncton. I don't really know what the appeal is on this pick, and there's only so much you can say about the 158th pick overall, but there were players blatantly available right in front of us that to me were better players on paper, both locally and internationally, that you could have swung on. But I guess if you like the kid, you like the kid. We'll have to wait and see. And on that note, they finished their draft at 181st overall, taking Cole Reinhardt, another 20-year-old player who plays for the Brandon Wheat Kings and was a point-per-game player as a D+2. That's not really something that I would find particularly notable, but he was a net positive offensive impact player for the Wheat Kings and did have a good nose for the front of the net from what I saw. I just don't think that this was a guy that I would have been picking at all in this year's NHL draft, especially this late in the draft. I probably would have circled back and tried to get him an ELC after this season's over, and I'm really not sure what warranted picking this player right now. If there was a risk of him going off the board between 181 and 217, I feel like you deal with that and move on to some other player or draft a younger player that you can just maintain their rights for longer. But Cole Reinhardt is another one of these guys where I watch him play and I just don't really know why a team would pick him with a draft pick, whether it's in the 6th round or the 1st round. We'll have to wait and see. Again, it's too early to tell anything specifically, but this is a 20-year-old who produces far, far less than typical 20-year-old players in the CHL who have been previously drafted by NHL teams. So we'll see, but I'm not super optimistic about Reinhardt, nor am I about the other 20-year-old players that the Ottawa Senators drafted this season. So for the Ottawa Senators, I have to give them something like a 2F. I really think Tim Stützle is going to be an electrifying, awesome offensive NHL player. Jake Sanderson, perfectly usable transition player both offensively and defensively. But this is a team that had the potential to knock this draft out of the park and had multiple lines of potential high-octane, high-flying offensive talent. Maybe there are other factors at play that caused their draft strategy to go in a bit of a different direction, tilting towards bigger, more physical, and older, more developed players playing overseas. But frankly, I would do whatever I could to avoid that strategy. I felt there were better players on the board at almost every single one of these picks. Robby Yarovanti is risky, but he could become a good player. And I wouldn't be surprised if he was more productive or had a better career than Ridly Greig does. Greig is going to be a player that gets tons and tons of chances, and I'm not sure he's going to be too much of an impact player outside of literal physical impact. He's got some talent, he's very young, he's got some skill, but again, at 28th overall, considering who was available, I don't think I saw enough to really warrant a pick that high. And beyond that, trading those picks for Tyler Kleven is at least questionable, and names like Sokolov and Engstrand and Daou and Reinhardt are guys, and I guess we'll see what happens with them. Sokolov could be a good trigger man if you can put him out on the power play and shelter his 5-on-5 minutes, maybe, but I'm not entirely sold on that proposition, especially at 61st overall. So to me, I think the Ottawa Senators, with the picks that you need to knock out of the park, got very valuable NHL players. But beyond that, I wouldn't be surprised if none of these players have really notable NHL careers long term. Again, a guy like Ridly Greig will probably play, but I'm not sure of his overall impact on the game. And someone like Robby Yarovanti, for as much as I love him, I think it's a huge risk because of his overall inconsistencies. But to me, this was a draft where the Ottawa Senators had the potential to completely rejuvenate their entire franchise top to bottom. And I'm not really sure what they came out of the draft with, so I guess we'll see in a few years. So that's it for the Ottawa Senators recap. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, you can click all the buttons you see below me so you never miss another one. If you really liked it, you could subscribe here on YouTube by clicking join below or going to Patreon and subscribing there. You'll get early access to videos, a Discord server, draft sheets for hundreds of drafted and undrafted prospects for all 31 teams, as well as plenty of other goodies. Or you can pick up some merchandise at the Scouchwear shop, where 50% of profits go to the Women's Sports Foundation. So that's it, and thanks for watching, and catch me in the next one where we look at the New York Rangers.